The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Maria Santos smoothed down her grandfather's Purple Heart one last time before walking into what she hoped would be her salvation. The VA disability hearing had been scheduled for months, and she'd rehearsed her story until it felt almost real. Combat stress, she would tell them. Nightmares from her deployment in Afghanistan. The medals weren't really stolen valor if they stayed in the family, right? The protesters had other ideas. Fake soldier, the woman's voice cut through the morning air like broken glass. Maria kept her eyes forward, ignoring the small but vocal crowd that had somehow learned about her hearing. In a town this size, gossip traveled faster than wildfire. You're a disgrace to everyone who actually served. Maria's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. She needed this. The disability payments would keep her tiny apartment, put food on the table, maybe even help her figure out who she really was before that morning 2 years ago when she'd woken up in a Detroit hospital with a head injury and no memory of how she'd gotten there. The doctors said retrograde amnesia wasn't uncommon with severe trauma, but the specifics of her past remained frustratingly blank. Officer Reynolds emerged from his patrol car, hitching up his duty belt with the self-importance of a small-town cop who rarely dealt with anything more serious than drunk drivers. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me." "I haven't done anything wrong." The words came out steadier than she felt. "I have a right to attend my hearing." "You have a right to remain silent," Reynolds replied, producing a set of handcuffs. "Maria Santos, you're under arrest for violations of the Stolen Valor Act. Someone called in a tip that you're wearing military decorations you didn't earn." The crowd's jeers grew louder. Maria felt her pulse quicken, but something else stirred beneath the surface anxiety, something that felt dangerous and familiar. As Reynolds reached for her wrist, her body moved without conscious thought. Her left hand swept up to intercept his arm while her right struck toward the pressure point at his elbow, a movement so fluid and precise it seemed to surprise them both. Reynolds stumbled backward, his eyes wide. "What the hell?" Maria stared at her own hands, shaking. Where had that come from? She'd never taken a self-defense class in her life, at least not that she could remember. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. That was just reflex." "Reflex my ass." Reynolds drew his weapon, though he kept it pointed downward. "Turn around, hands behind your back, now." This time, Maria complied without resistance, but her mind raced. The movement had felt as natural as breathing, muscle memory from a source she couldn't identify. As the cold steel clicked around her wrists, she noticed her breathing had automatically shifted to a combat rhythm, slow, controlled, oxygenating her blood for action. Another reflex she didn't remember learning. "You have the right to remain silent," Reynolds began, but Maria barely heard the Miranda warning. Her attention had shifted to the courthouse windows, automatically cataloging sight lines and potential threat positions. Her eyes swept the crowd, identifying the loudest agitators and noting their positioning relative to available cover. Why was she thinking like this? Normal people didn't assess crowds for tactical advantages. The short walk to the patrol car felt like a gauntlet. The protesters followed, hurling insults and accusations. Maria kept her head down, but her peripheral vision remained active, tracking movement with an intensity that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. One protester got too close, a middle-aged man with a veteran's cap and righteous fury in his eyes. "My son died in Kandahar," he spat, "and you want to profit off his sacrifice." Something cold settled in Maria's chest. For just a moment, she could smell cordite and sand, hear the distant thump of helicopter rotors. The sensation lasted only seconds before dissolving back into the foggy void where her memories should have been. At the police station, Reynolds guided her to the booking desk where Sergeant Walsh waited with the paperwork. Walsh was older, calmer, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen enough to know when something didn't add up. "This the stolen valor case?" Walsh asked, taking Maria's purse and beginning the inventory process. "That's her." Maria Santos, age 28, unemployed. Reynolds rattled off the details while Walsh's fingers moved across his keyboard. Claims she served in Afghanistan, but according to the tip we got, she's never been in the military at all. Walsh paused, frowning at his screen. That's odd. Her prints are taking longer to process than usual. Sometimes that means, the computer chimed, and Walsh's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Jesus Christ. What? Reynolds leaned over to look at the screen, but Walsh had already minimized the window. I need to make a phone call. Walsh's voice had gone flat, professional. Put her in holding cell too. Don't let anyone else near her until I get back. Maria watched the exchange with growing unease. Whatever had appeared on that screen, it hadn't been good news. As Reynolds led her toward the holding cells, she found herself automatically noting the station's layout, exit points, weapon storage, communication equipment. The knowledge came unbidden, as if some buried part of her mind was cataloging escape routes and tactical options. The cell was small but clean, with a narrow window that looked out onto the parking lot. Maria sat on the thin mattress, trying to make sense of what was happening. The medals in question, her grandfather's Purple Heart, Bronze Star, and Combat Infantry Badge, felt heavier against her chest now. She'd found them in the shoebox that contained everything she'd owned when she woke up in the hospital. No family had come forward to claim her. No friends had visited. She'd assumed the medals belonged to a grandfather she couldn't remember, a family history lost to her amnesia. But what if she was wrong? Through the cell window, she could see Walsh packing in the parking lot, his phone pressed to his ear. Even from this distance, his body language screamed urgency. He gestured emphatically, occasionally glancing back toward the station with an expression she couldn't quite read. Fear, excitement, something in between. 20 minutes later, Walsh returned, his face pale but determined. He approached her cell with Reynolds in tow, both men looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Ma'am," Walsh began carefully, "I'm going to need you to stay calm. We're waiting for some federal agents to arrive. They want to ask you a few questions." "Federal agents," Maria stood up, her pulse quickening again. "About stolen valor, that seems like overkill." Walsh exchanged a look with Reynolds. "It's not about the medals anymore. Ma'am, when your fingerprints hit the system, they triggered some kind of alert. A big one. Apparently you're supposed to be dead." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. Dead. That's impossible. I'm obviously not dead. According to the federal database, a woman with your fingerprints was killed in action 3 years ago in a classified operation overseas. Her body was never recovered, listed as KIA, presumed dead. Maria's legs gave out and she sat heavily on the cell's bench. 3 years ago, she would have been 25. The timing aligned perfectly with the blank space in her memory. But killed in action. That implied military service, real military service, not the fiction she'd been living. "What was her name?" she whispered. Walsh consulted his notes. The file's heavily redacted, but the name shows as Chen Sarah L. Major, United States Army, Special Operations. Sarah, the name echoed in her mind like a ghost calling from a deep well. Not Maria Santos at all, but Sarah Chen. Why did that feel both completely foreign and utterly familiar at the same time? "I don't remember," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, fragments began surfacing. Sand and blood, the weight of body armor, a voice shouting orders in the darkness. "I don't remember any of it." Outside, the sound of approaching helicopters began as a distant whisper, growing steadily louder. Walsh looked up, his face grim. "Ma'am, I think you're about to remember more than you want to." Through the narrow window, Maria could see black shapes on the horizon, moving fast and low. Not one helicopter, but several, flying in formation with military precision. As they grew closer, she found herself counting them automatically, 6 birds, probably Black Hawks, coming in hot. Her heart began to race, but this time it wasn't fear. It was recognition. and somewhere in the darkest corners of her buried memory, a voice whispered, "Run." The helicopters materialized from the western sky like mechanical death angels, their black silhouettes cutting through the morning sun with predatory grace. Maria, no, Sarah. She had to start thinking of herself as Sarah now, pressed her face against the cell window, watching the formation approach with a mixture of dread and inexplicable familiarity. 6 aircraft in perfect tactical formation. 2 lead birds flanked by 4 support craft, maintaining precise intervals that spoke of military discipline and extensive training. As they drew closer, she could make out the details, no visible markings, matte black paint designed to absorb radar, and the distinctive profile of heavily modified Black Hawks. These weren't regular military transports. These were ghost birds, the kind used for operations that officially never happened. Jesus Christ, Officer Reynolds breathed from somewhere behind her. Who the hell calls in 6 helicopters for a stolen Valor case? Through the cell's small window, Sarah watched the lead helicopter circle the police station once, then twice, like a predator studying its prey. Her body tensed involuntarily, muscles coiling with an energy she didn't fully understand. Something deep in her cellular memory recognized the sound of those rotors, the particular rhythm of military aircraft moving with deadly purpose. The first helicopter touched down in the courthouse parking lot, its rotor wash sending debris flying in violent spirals. Before the wheels had fully settled, tactical-clad figures were fast-roping from the other aircraft, their movements choreographed with lethal precision. Sarah counted 12 operators per bird, 72 total assets for one supposedly dead woman. Either she was far more important than anyone had let on, or far more dangerous. "Get away from the window," Sergeant Walsh ordered, his voice tight with an authority born of genuine fear. He'd served 2 tours in Iraq and recognized a full-scale military operation when he saw one. "Both of you, back to the desk, now." But Sarah couldn't move. Watching the tactical teams deploy triggered something primal in her hindbrain, like watching a pack of wolves circle their territory. She knew their patterns instinctively: perimeter security first, entry teams second, extraction protocols third. Her eyes tracked their movements automatically, cataloging weapons, identifying team leaders, noting communication patterns. The lead team moved with the fluid grace of operators who trained together for years. Point man with a carbine, 2 flankers with automatic weapons, heavy weapons specialist bringing up the rear. They advanced in textbook formation toward the police station's front entrance, their gear and movements suggesting Tier 1 special operations, Delta Force, maybe, or a classified unit operating under different designations. "Those aren't federal agents," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying an odd certainty. "They're cleaners." "What?" Reynolds turned from where he'd been frantically trying to raise dispatch on his radio. "What did you say?" Sarah's mind raced, fragments of knowledge surfacing like debris from a sunken ship. Cleaners, wet work specialists, the military's way of permanently resolving problems that couldn't be handled through official channels. If they were here for her, it meant someone with serious authority wanted Major Sarah Chen to stay dead. "They're not here to arrest me," she continued, her voice taking on an edge that made both officers step back instinctively. "They're here to finish what someone started 3 years ago." The front door of the police station exploded inward with a flashbang's brilliant violence. Even through her cell walls, the concussion wave rattled Sarah's teeth and set her ears ringing. Emergency lighting flickered as the building's electrical systems struggled to compensate for the electromagnetic pulse. In the sudden semi-darkness, red laser dots danced across the walls like deadly fireflies. "Federal agents." The voice that boomed through the smoke was calm, professional, carrying absolute authority. "We're here for the prisoner in protective custody. Stand down and prepare for immediate transfer." Protective custody. Sarah almost laughed at the euphemism. In her experience, protective custody usually meant a shallow grave in an unmarked location. Through the haze, she could see the tactical team moving with mechanical efficiency. They'd practiced this exact scenario dozens of times: rapid entry, secure the target, extract without collateral damage unless absolutely necessary. The officers' service weapons looked like toys compared to the military-grade hardware these operators carried. "Show me your warrant," Sergeant Walsh demanded, though his voice cracked with the strain of facing down superior firepower. "This is a local jurisdiction. You can't just—" "This facility is now under federal authority," came the reply. A figure emerged from the smoke, tall and commanding, wearing the woodland digital camouflage of Army Special Operations Command. Sarah couldn't see his face clearly through the tactical goggles and communication headset, but something about his bearing triggered another cascade of memories. Command presence, the way he held his shoulders, the precise cadence of his speech patterns. She knew this man. The realization hit her like ice water in her veins. Not just knew him, had served under him, trusted him, followed his orders into hell and back. But the memory came wrapped in darkness, tinged with betrayal and the metallic taste of blood in her mouth. "Where is she?" the commander asked Walsh, his tone suggesting this was more courtesy than actual question. Behind him, Sarah could see his team spreading out to cover every angle, every possible escape route. Standard protocol for high-value target extraction. Walsh glanced toward the holding cells, his face pale but determined. "Sir, with all due respect, I'm going to need to see some identification before." The commander's hand moved to his sidearm with casual menace. "Sergeant Walsh, Robert J., badge number 4471, 18 years service with the County Sheriff's Department. 2 tour in Iraq with the 82nd Airborne. Divorced, 2 children, Emma, age 12, and Daniel, age 9. They attend Riverside Elementary School." Walsh's face went white. The threat was implicit but crystal clear. "The woman you're holding is a matter of national security," the commander continued. "Her continued existence compromises ongoing operations and puts American lives at risk. We're here to resolve that problem permanently." Sarah felt her blood turn to liquid nitrogen. Not transfer, not questioning, permanent resolution. These weren't federal agents at all, they were assassination specialists, come to finish a job they'd thought completed 3 years ago. The commander stepped closer to Walsh, close enough that Sarah could finally see his face clearly through the cell window. The features were older, more weathered, but unmistakably familiar. Colonel Hayes, though he'd been a lieutenant colonel the last time she'd seen him, shouting orders through a radio while her team died around her. Hayes, the memory came flooding back now with sickening clarity. Operation Blackbird, the mission to extract a high-value target from a Taliban compound in the Hindu Kush. Intelligence had been perfect, too perfect, as it turned out. Her 8-person team had walked into an ambush that killed 7 of America's best operators. Only Hayes had known their exact insertion point. Only Hayes had access to their mission timeline. Only Hayes could have sold them out to enemy forces. And when the dust settled, when the body count was tallied, only Major Sarah Chen had been listed as missing, presumed KIA. No body recovered. No closure for her family, assuming she still had one. "I want to see her," Hayes continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "Face to face, before we proceed with extraction protocols." Sarah's hands began to tremble, but not with fear, with rage. The son of a bitch had sold out her entire team, faked her death, and now he'd come to finish the job personally. Whatever she'd done to survive that ambush, whatever had happened in the 3 years since, it hadn't been enough to stay buried. "Cell 2, Walsh said reluctantly, his shoulders sagging in defeat. "But I want it on record that I protested this action." "Duly noted, Sergeant." Hayes approached the holding cells with the confident stride of someone who believed he held all the cards. His team maintained overwatch positions. their weapons trained on the local officers while their commander conducted his business. When he reached Sarah's cell, their eyes met through the reinforced glass window, and she watched his confident expression dissolve into something between shock and genuine fear. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible even in the sudden quiet. "I watched you die. I saw the explosion take down that entire ridge." Sarah stood slowly, meeting his gaze with the calm intensity of someone who'd been dead for 3 years and was finally ready to start haunting the living. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the authority of a field officer addressing subordinate personnel. "Hello, Colonel. Funny thing about dying, sometimes you get better." Hayes' hand dropped to his sidearm, but Sarah was already moving. 3 years of buried muscle memory exploded back to life as she assessed angles, distances, and tactical options with the cold precision of someone trained to kill with minimal resources. "You should have stayed dead, Sarah," Hayes said, drawing his weapon. "My mistake, but mistakes can be corrected." Through the cell window, Sarah could see additional movement outside. More operators taking positions around the building perimeter. But something was wrong with their positioning, too spread out, too many gaps in their coverage pattern. Almost like they were expecting company. "Colonel," she said, allowing herself a cold smile, "you always did underestimate your personnel. Did you really think I was the only ghost on your casualty list?" Hayes frowned, touching his comm unit. "Overwatch, report status." The silence that greeted him was answer enough. The silence stretching through Hayes' comm unit lasted exactly 7 seconds. Sarah counted them automatically, another fragment of tactical training surfacing from her buried memories. 7 seconds was an eternity in combat operations, long enough for a sniper to acquire a target, long enough for a demo charge to be armed, long enough for ghosts to rise from graves that were never meant to be temporary. "Overwatch, respond immediately," Hayes barked into his headset, his earlier confidence cracking like thin ice. The weapon in his hand remained trained on Sarah, but his eyes had begun scanning the police station's windows with the paranoid intensity of someone who suddenly realized he might not be the apex predator in this particular food chain. Sarah pressed her face closer to the cell window, studying Hayes' facial expressions with the clinical detachment of someone who'd spent years reading enemy tells in life-or-death situations. Fear was creeping in around the edges of his composure, the slight tightening around his eyes, the barely perceptible tremor in his gun hand, the way his jaw clenched when his comm unit remained ominously quiet. "Problem with your backup, Colonel?" she asked, her voice carrying a dangerous edge of amusement. "Funny how hard it is to find good help these days." Hayes spun toward his tactical team, gesturing sharply. "Bravo team, external sweep. Alpha team, maintain position on the civilians." But even as he issued orders, Sarah could see doubt creeping into his operators' movements. These were professionals, they knew the sound of a compromised operation, and the absence of perimeter reports was setting off every alarm in their highly trained minds. Through the station's front windows, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement on the courthouse roof across the street. Just a shadow shifting against the morning sky, but her trained eye picked out the distinctive silhouette of a sniper settling into an overwatch position. Not one of Hayes' people. The angle was wrong, the positioning too aggressive for defensive perimeter security. Someone else was playing this game. "You know what the funny thing about faking someone's death is, Colonel," Sarah continued, settling back against her cell wall with the casual confidence of someone holding a royal flush. "You have to make sure they actually want to stay dead." Hayes' face had gone pale beneath his tactical gear. "Impossible. The entire ridge came down. I saw the satellite footage. Nothing could have survived that blast." "Oh, I didn't survive." Sarah's smile held no warmth whatsoever. "Major Sarah Chen died in that ambush, just like you planned. What crawled out of that rubble was something else entirely. something with a very specific set of skills and a really, really long memory. The first sniper shot came through the police station's front window with the distinctive crack of a .338 Lapua Magnum round. One of Hayes' operators dropped instantly, the precision headshot dropping him like a marionette with cut strings. The remaining tactical team scattered, seeking cover behind overturned desks and concrete pillars, their disciplined formation dissolving into controlled chaos. Contact, sniper, northwest rooftop. The shout came from Hayes' team leader, but Sarah could hear the confusion in his voice. Northwest put the shooter on the wrong building, in a position that should have been covered by their perimeter team, the team that wasn't responding to radio calls. Hayes dove behind the booking desk, his weapon now forgotten as survival instincts took over. Who the hell is shooting at us? Friends of mine, Sarah replied conversationally, though she was already moving to the back corner of her cell, positioning herself away from potential ricochets. Well, former friends, we had a bit of a falling out about 3 years ago. Something about being betrayed by our commanding officer and left to die in a Taliban kill zone. The second shot punched through the station's side window, and another of Hayes' operators went down. This one from a different angle entirely, east side, probably the bank building. Sarah's tactical mind automatically triangulated firing positions, and what she calculated made her smile with genuine pleasure. Crossfire, multiple shooters, coordinated targeting. This wasn't random harassment. This was a precision operation conducted by people who knew exactly what they were doing. Team 7, respond. Hayes screamed into his radio. Team 5, what's your status? The only response was the deadly whisper of a third shot, this one coming from street level. Through the chaos, Sarah caught a glimpse of a figure moving with fluid grace between parked cars, advancing on the police station with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this dance many times before. The movement pattern triggered another cascade of memories. Sergeant Martinez, her former demolitions expert, whose approach to urban warfare had always favored aggressive infiltration over cautious overwatch. Martinez, who'd supposedly died when the ridge collapsed. Martinez, who apparently had some issues to discuss with their former commanding officer. This isn't possible, Hayes whispered more to himself than anyone else. The casualty reports were confirmed, DNA evidence, dental records, they're all dead. Colonel, you always were terrible at reading the fine print, Sarah said, settling in to enjoy the show. Did you actually see bodies, or did you just see what someone wanted you to see? The truth was starting to dawn on Hayes' face, and Sarah found the progression fascinating to watch. Horror, then disbelief, then the sick realization that he'd been outplayed by opponents he'd thought safely buried. The operation he'd believed was a clean elimination of witnesses had instead created something far more dangerous. A team of highly trained operators with nothing left to lose and a very personal vendetta. Sergeant Walsh, Sarah called out to where the local officer was huddled behind an overturned desk. I'd recommend keeping your head down for the next few minutes. This is about to get very messy. Walsh nodded frantically, his service weapon drawn but clearly useless against the military-grade firefight erupting around him. Officer Reynolds had taken cover in the supply closet, his face pale with the realization that small-town policing hadn't prepared him for spec ops warfare. Hayes' remaining operators were trying to establish defensive positions, but they were fighting blind against enemies who clearly knew their playbook. Every time they exposed themselves to acquire targets, another precision shot would force them back into cover. Classic suppression tactics, designed not to eliminate but to control movement and break unit cohesion. Alpha leader to base, Hayes spoke desperately into his comm unit. Request immediate extraction. Operation is compromised. Repeat, operation is blown. The response, when it came, was not what he'd been expecting. Negative on extraction, Colonel. The voice was distorted by electronic scramblers, but Sarah could hear the cold satisfaction underlying the words. "You're on your own down there." Hayes' face went white. "This is Colonel Michael Hayes, authorization Blackbird 77. I'm ordering immediate air support." "Authorization code not recognized," came the reply. "Colonel Hayes is currently listed as KIA, effective this morning. Have a nice day." Sarah actually laughed out loud. "Oh, that's beautiful. Did you really think you were the only one who could manipulate casualty reports? My team always was better at creative paperwork than yours." Through the station's windows, she could see more figures moving into position. Not Hayes people. Their movements were too fluid, too familiar. Team members she'd thought dead for 3 years, very much alive and very clearly holding grudges. Corporal Jackson emerging from behind the courthouse, his distinctive left-handed shooting stance unchanged despite supposedly being blown to pieces 3 years ago. Staff Sergeant Kim taking position near the post office, her approach to urban warfare as methodical and terrifying as Sarah remembered. And there, moving through the alley with the predatory grace of someone born for violence, Master Sergeant Tors, her former second-in-command, who'd taken a Taliban bullet to the chest and apparently gotten better. "7 operators," Sarah said, more to herself than to Hayes. 7 people you betrayed, 7 graves that turned out to be empty, 7 very pissed-off professionals with extensive training in creative problem-solving." Hayes was frantically working his radio, cycling through frequencies, calling for backup that would never come. His remaining team members were pinned down, outgunned, and facing opponents who knew their tactics better than they knew themselves. "How?" he whispered, finally accepting that his carefully orchestrated operation had become his own execution. "Simple," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the calm satisfaction of someone whose plans were finally coming together. "We never trusted you. Not completely. When you sent us into that ambush, we were ready. Body doubles, fake dental records, a little creative CGI for the satellite footage. We've been dead to the world for 3 years, which turns out to be remarkably liberating when it comes to settling old scores." The next shot came from directly overhead. Someone had reached the police station's roof. Hayes looked up at the ceiling tiles, his face a mask of absolute terror as he realized his tactical situation had become completely untenable. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah stood up, pressing her hands against the cell door with newfound confidence. "Justice, Colonel, the kind that doesn't involve courtrooms or lawyers or official channels, the kind that people like you made necessary when you decided to play God with our lives." Through her cell window, she could see Tors approaching the station's entrance, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd already won. In his hand was something that made Sarah's heart sing with anticipation, a ring of keys that looked suspiciously like they belonged to the police station's holding cells. "Time to finish this conversation face to face, Colonel," she said, as the sound of the front door opening echoed through the station. "Don't you think?" The lock on Sarah's cell clicked open with a sound like destiny fulfilling itself. Master Sergeant Tors stood in the doorway, his weathered face bearing 3 years' worth of scars that hadn't been there during their last mission together. A jagged line ran from his left temple to his jaw, and his right hand moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to compensate for nerve damage. But his eyes burned with the same predatory intelligence that had made him Sarah's most trusted operator. "Ma'am," he said, offering her a crisp salute that was equal parts respect and dark humor. "Sorry we're late. Traffic was murder." Sarah stepped out of the cell, her body automatically falling into the command posture she'd held for 8 years before Hayes' betrayal had supposedly ended her career. "Status report, Sergeant. Perimeter secure. Enemy assets neutralized or contained. Local law enforcement is cooperating." Tors handed her a tactical earpiece and a service pistol liberated from one of Hayes' fallen operators. Martinez has the building wired for demo, Kim's providing overwatch from 3 positions, and Jackson's handling electronic warfare. We've got Hayes' extraction team locked down tight. Through the police station's shattered windows, Sarah could see the tactical situation with crystalline clarity. Hayes' 6 helicopters sat motionless in the courthouse parking lot, their crews undoubtedly dead or incapacitated. Smoke rose from several of the aircraft, Martinez's handiwork, ensuring no one would be leaving by air. The surviving members of Hayes' assault team were barricaded behind whatever cover they could find, but their positions were untenable against operators who knew their playbook better than they did. "Colonel Hayes," Sarah called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years commanding life-or-death operations. "I believe you wanted to discuss my continued existence. Let's talk." Hayes emerged from behind the booking desk like a man walking to his own execution, his weapon lowered but still gripped in white-knuckled hands. The confident Special Operations Commander who'd entered the station 20 minutes earlier was gone, replaced by someone who'd suddenly realized he was completely outclassed by opponents he'd thought safely buried. "This is impossible," he whispered, staring at Sarah as if she were a supernatural apparition. "The intelligence reports, the casualty confirmations, the DNA evidence, everything pointed to total team elimination." "Did you really think we'd trust you completely after what happened in Syria?" Sarah asked, circling him with the predatory grace of someone who'd spent 3 years planning this moment. "After that clusterfuck in Mosul, after every mission where your intelligence turned out to be just a little too convenient for enemy forces." Torres moved to flank Hayes from the other side, his movements coordinated with Sarah's through years of shared combat experience. Through her earpiece, she could hear her other team members checking in from their positions around the building. 7 operators, supposedly dead, now controlling every aspect of the tactical environment. "Syria was different," Hayes protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "That was a legitimate intelligence failure, equipment malfunction, bad luck." "Bad luck?" Sarah's laugh held no humor whatsoever. "Sergeant Torres, would you care to explain to the colonel what we discovered about his Syrian intelligence sources?" Torres pulled a tablet from his tactical vest, swiping through files that made Hayes' face go progressively paler. Intercepted communications between Colonel Hayes and a known arms dealer named Qasim Rashid. Financial transfers totaling $2.3 million over 18 months. Purchase orders for weapons that ended up in Taliban hands. "Shall I continue, ma'am?" "Please do." Falsified mission reports, manipulated casualty figures, ghost personnel on his unit's payroll, dead soldiers whose benefits were being redirected to offshore accounts. Torres looked up from the tablet with disgust. "He's been selling American blood for profit, ma'am, for years." Hayes' remaining composure cracked completely. "You don't understand the pressures, the impossible situations. Command expects results, but they don't provide resources. Sometimes you have to make difficult choices." "Difficult choices?" Sarah's voice dropped to the deadly whisper that had terrified enemy combatants across 3 continents. "Like selling out your own people to enemy forces, like arranging the deaths of 8 decorated soldiers to cover your tracks." Through her earpiece, Corporal Jackson's voice crackled with electronic distortion. "Ma'am, I've got multiple federal agencies trying to re-establish contact with Hayes' team. FBI, CIA, NSA, they're all getting radio silence. How long do you want me to maintain the blackout?" "Indefinitely," Sarah replied, never taking her eyes off Hayes. "This is family business." Hayes made a desperate lunge for his weapon, but Torres was already moving. 3 years of surviving in hostile territory had made all of them faster, more ruthless, more willing to embrace violence as a solution to complex problems. Torres' boot connected with Hayes' wrist with a sound like breaking wood, and the pistol went skittering across the floor. "Sergeant Walsh," Sarah called out to where the local policeman was still huddled behind his desk. "I apologize for the destruction of your facility. You'll find compensation in your department's budget within 48 hours, along with commendations for your cooperation with a classified federal operation." Walsh nodded frantically, clearly too terrified to do anything but agree with whatever the heavily armed operators wanted. Hayes clutched his broken wrist, staring up at Sarah with a mixture of pain and disbelief. "You can't do this. I'm a United States Army colonel. I have protection, oversight. People will come looking for me." "Colonel Hayes died this morning," Torres said conversationally, consulting his tablet again. "Killed in action during a terrorist attack on a federal facility. Very tragic. His body was unfortunately destroyed in the subsequent explosion." Through the windows, Sarah could see Martinez approaching with what looked suspiciously like military-grade demolition charges. Her former demolitions expert had always believed in thorough problem-solving, and 3 years of operating in the shadows had apparently not changed her approach to creative destruction. "The beautiful thing about being officially dead," Sarah continued, "is that it gives you remarkable freedom when it comes to dispensing justice. No lawyers, no military tribunals, no political considerations. Just simple, direct problem-solving." Hayes tried to stand, but Torres placed a firm hand on his shoulder, keeping him seated on the floor. "What do you want?" "Money. I can arrange transfers. Whatever you've been doing for 3 years, whoever you're working for now, I can make it worth your while." "What we want," Sarah said, pulling out her own tablet and beginning to swipe through files, "is for every family member of every soldier you got killed to know exactly what happened to their sons and daughters. We want your offshore accounts emptied and distributed to veterans' charities. We want every arms dealer, every terrorist contact, every corrupt official in your network to wake up tomorrow to find their operations completely compromised." She turned the tablet around, showing Hayes a complex flowchart that represented 3 years of meticulous intelligence gathering. Financial networks, communication trees, operational details for every corrupt transaction he'd conducted over the past decade. "Jackson's been busy," she continued. "Turns out, when you're officially dead, you can access some very interesting databases without anyone noticing. Did you know your Syrian contact has been selling American weapons to ISIS? And your Afghan source has been providing targeting data for attacks on coalition forces." Hayes' face went white as he recognized the scope of what they'd uncovered. "Those operations were sanctioned, classified. You don't have clearance for that information." "Dead people don't need clearance." Martinez's voice came through the earpiece, accompanied by the sound of charges being armed throughout the building. "They just need justice." Torres checked his watch, then nodded to Sarah. "Ma'am, we've got about 10 minutes before federal response teams start wondering why they can't raise Hayes' unit on the radio. Time to wrap this up." Sarah looked down at Hayes, this man who'd traded American lives for personal profit, who destroyed her team to cover his tracks, who'd thought he could manipulate casualty reports to erase his crimes. 3 years ago, he'd held the power of life and death over her people. Now, the tables were completely turned. "You have two choices, Colonel," she said, her voice carrying the finality of someone rendering ultimate judgment. "Option 1, we leave you here when this building comes down. Your death gets blamed on the terrorist attack you supposedly died fighting against. Clean, simple, poetic justice." Hayes' breath came in desperate gasps. "What's option 2? "Option 2, Torres said, producing a laptop and setting it in front of Hayes. "You transfer every dollar in your offshore accounts to veterans' charities. Provide us with complete intelligence on your entire criminal network, and spend the rest of your life in a very deep, very dark hole where you can contemplate the consequences of betraying your own people." Sarah checked her watch. "You have 30 seconds to decide. Choose wisely, Colonel. Dead or disappeared, either way Michael Hayes stops existing today." Through the smoke and chaos of the destroyed police station, with the sounds of approaching sirens in the distance and her team preparing for exfiltration. Sarah Chen finally felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Justice. And it tasted exactly like she'd hoped it would.